you still react to people who disrespect you. That's the weakness they're feeding on. The moment you detach completely, the power structure reverses, and they begin collapsing without you lifting a finger. Most men are trained to believe that responding is strength. Someone insults you? Respond. Someone challenges you? Defend yourself. Someone provokes you? Prove them wrong. From childhood, this reflex is installed like software in the mind. Teachers call it confidence. Society calls it assertiveness. Weak men call it standing your ground. But in the real architecture of power, reaction is rarely dominance. Reaction is access. Every time you respond emotionally, you hand someone the steering wheel of your nervous system. Your anger, your defense, your explanations, these are signals. Signals that say one thing very clearly: you can still be moved. And the moment someone discovers they can move you, they begin experimenting with pressure. A small insult here, a subtle jab there, a little disrespect in front of others. They watch carefully, not because they hate you, because they are measuring you. Human beings are constantly scanning their environment for hierarchy. Who bends? Who reacts? Who explains themselves? Who needs approval? Most men fail this test immediately because they believe engagement proves power. But engagement does something far more dangerous. It reveals hunger. The hunger to be understood, the hunger to be respected, the hunger to be validated. And hunger is always exploited. Predators don't chase animals that stand still with calm eyes. They chase the ones that panic, move, and reveal weakness through motion. The same rule governs social power. The man who reacts becomes predictable. Predictable men are easy to manipulate. If someone knows which buttons trigger you, anger, insecurity, ego, they now possess remote control over your behavior. They don't need authority. They don't need strength. They just need your reaction. This is why manipulators rarely attack directly at first. They probe. A sarcastic comment disguised as a joke, a small act of disrespect masked as confidence, a subtle attempt to interrupt your authority in conversation. Then they wait, because the response tells them everything. If you explain yourself, they see insecurity. If you argue emotionally, they see instability. If you overreact, they see control. But when nothing happens, the entire psychological script breaks. Silence introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison to people who rely on control. Understand something most men never realize. Attention is the most valuable currency in human interaction. Where attention flows, power follows. Every time you respond to nonsense, you invest your attention into someone else's emotional game. You elevate their importance. You validate their attempt to control the frame of the interaction.
They throw a stone. You pick it up and throw it back. Now you're both in the mud. But the man who refuses the game creates a different dynamic entirely. He does not explain. He does not defend. He does not perform emotional gymnastics to prove his worth. He simply withdraws the one thing manipulators cannot survive without: reaction. And when reaction disappears, something fascinating begins to happen. The other person becomes restless. They escalate. They repeat the insult. They push harder. They become louder, more dramatic, more emotional. Why? Because silence exposes something they were hiding: dependence. They needed your reaction to stabilize their ego. Without it, the control loop collapses. Now the pressure reverses. Instead of you chasing respect, they begin chasing your attention. This is the moment most men ruin everything. The moment they see the other person destabilizing, they re-engage emotionally. They explain, they confront, they try to win. But true detachment does not chase victory. It allows collapse. You see, power is not proven by dominating every interaction. Power is proven by deciding which interactions deserve to exist. and most of them don't. The man who understands this begins operating under a completely different rule. If someone tries to control my emotions, they lose access to my presence. No drama, no speeches, no revenge, just absence. To weak minds, this looks like indifference. To manipulators, it feels like suffocation. Because the moment you detach, they lose the only weapon they had, your reaction. And once that weapon disappears, the collapse begins. Most people think control comes from authority, money, or physical strength. But the real mechanism of control is far quieter. It runs on a loop, a psychological loop built from three simple components: attention, reaction, and validation. Once you see this loop clearly, human behavior becomes painfully predictable. Because most people are not thinking strategically. They're running emotional programs, and those programs require constant reinforcement. Here is how the loop works. Someone throws a comment at you, a challenge, a jab, a subtle disrespect. If you react, something critical happens immediately. Your brain releases energy into the interaction, attention, emotion, explanation, defense. At the same time, the other person receives a psychological reward. Not because they were right, because they moved you. Moving someone emotionally is a form of power, even if the reaction is anger, even if the reaction is disagreement, even if the reaction is a long explanation defending your position. The reaction itself confirms their influence, and influence is addictive. Human beings are wired to repeat behaviors that generate emotional feedback. Every reaction you give becomes reinforcement. It tells the other person, "This works, do it again." This is why certain people keep provoking the same arguments, the same conflicts, the same emotional traps. They are not searching for truth, they are maintaining the control loop. The loop needs energy. Your reaction is the fuel. Without it, the system starves. Think of it like a machine with 3 gears. The first gear is provocation. The second gear is your reaction. The third gear is their psychological reward. When all 3 gears turn, the machine runs smoothly. But remove one gear, and the machine grinds to a halt. This is where detachment becomes devastating. When someone provokes you and you offer nothing, no defense, no emotional shift, no attempt to prove yourself, you break the second gear. The loop stalls. Now the person who initiated the interaction faces something they did not expect: silence. Silence does something extremely uncomfortable to the human mind. It removes feedback, and the human brain cannot tolerate missing feedback for long. This is why people start escalating when ignored. They repeat themselves, they raise their voice, they try sharper insults. They are attempting to restart the loop. But the moment you remain detached, something flips. The control they believed they had begins to dissolve. Now their mind begins asking dangerous questions. Why didn't he react? Did it not affect him? Did I lose control of the frame? Uncertainty grows, and uncertainty creates psychological pressure. The same pressure they tried to place on you is now sitting on their shoulders. Most men fail at this stage because they misunderstand silence. They think silence is weakness. They think silence means losing the argument. But arguments are the playground of people fighting for attention. Powerful individuals fight for something different: control of the frame. The frame determines who holds authority in an interaction. If someone provokes you and you react emotionally, you enter their frame. Now you're playing their game. But when you refuse the reaction entirely, something fascinating happens. The frame collapses. Because the frame requires 2 participants. Without your engagement, the other person is arguing alone in an empty arena. This is why strategic detachment feels so unsettling to people. It forces them to confront themselves, and many cannot tolerate that. You must understand something brutal about human nature. Most individuals do not want control over their own emotions. They want control of yours. They want to push a button and see the response: anger, frustration, defense, because each response confirms that they still matter inside your mind. Detachment removes that confirmation, and when confirmation disappears, insecurity floods in. The provocateur now begins chasing what they previously controlled.
Your attention. This is why detachment feels like a reversal of gravity in social dynamics. The man who once reacted becomes the man who cannot be moved, and the people who relied on your reactions suddenly find themselves powerless. But this shift reveals something even darker about human behavior. Not everyone around you is interacting in good faith. Some people are specialists in provoking reactions. They live off emotional chaos. They hunt for it. And if you cannot identify these personalities, detachment becomes impossible. Because you will continue reacting to people who were never seeking peace in the first place. They were seeking control. And they wear many masks: the manipulator, the challenger, the attention addict. These are not rare personalities. They are everywhere. And if you don't recognize them, they will keep pulling you back into the loop. Which brings us to the next layer of the problem: the predators who survive entirely on your reaction. Not every person in your life is simply difficult. Some are strategic. They understand, consciously or instinctively, that human reactions are currency, and they survive by extracting that currency from others. These people do not want peace. They want leverage. And the easiest way to obtain leverage is by controlling someone's emotional state. If they can make you angry, they control you. If they can make you defend yourself, they control you. If they can make you explain your worth, they control you. Your reaction becomes their proof of dominance. Most men never recognize these personalities because they expect conflict to look obvious: loud voices, direct insults, clear hostility. But real psychological predators rarely move that way. They operate subtly. They provoke reactions while maintaining plausible innocence. And once you understand their patterns, you start seeing them everywhere. The first archetype is the provocateur. The provocateur thrives on agitation. They drop comments designed to irritate, embarrass, or challenge you, but always disguised as humor or honesty. "Relax, it was just a joke. Why are you getting so sensitive? I'm just telling the truth." These phrases are shields. They allow the provocateur to attack while pretending they did nothing wrong. If you react emotionally, they win twice. First, they moved you. Second, they frame you as unstable. Now the social narrative shifts against you. You become the man who can't handle criticism. The provocateur walks away looking calm, while you look reactive. This is not an accident. It is a tactic. The second archetype is the covert manipulator. Unlike the provocateur, this person rarely attacks directly. Their weapon is subtle psychological pressure. They question your decisions. They imply you're overreacting. They slowly chip away at your confidence. But they do it in a way that feels almost caring. "Are you sure that's the right move? I just don't want you to make a mistake. You're taking things too personally." Each comment seems harmless, but over time, the effect is corrosive. They push you into a position where you constantly explain yourself, justify your choices, defend your reasoning. In other words, they pull you into the reaction loop. And once you're there, they quietly control the rhythm of your emotional state. The third archetype is the most desperate and the most common: the validation addict. This person is addicted to attention.
They don't necessarily hate you, they simply need your reaction to feel important. If they receive praise, they escalate. If they receive criticism, they escalate. If they receive silence, they panic. Because silence means irrelevance, and irrelevance is unbearable to someone whose identity depends on constant attention. So they provoke. They interrupt conversations, they challenge your statements, they attempt to redirect focus towards themselves, anything to generate reaction. If you react emotionally, they receive the dopamine hit they were seeking. But if you detach completely, something fascinating happens. Their behavior becomes louder, then erratic, then self-destructive. Because their strategy depends entirely on your participation. Remove the audience, and the performer begins unraveling. This is the moment when many men experience confusion. They think, why are they acting even more aggressively now? Because predators hate losing their food source. When reaction disappears, the psychological predator experiences withdrawal. They escalate to recover control. Stronger insults, sharper provocations, more dramatic behavior. They are attempting to force the reaction back into existence. And this is the moment where your discipline matters most. Because if you break now, if you react, argue, defend, you feed the system again. The predator relaxes, the loop restarts. But if you maintain detachment, the escalation begins damaging them, not you. Their mask slips. People start noticing their behavior. The provocateur begins looking obsessive. The manipulator begins looking controlling. The validation addict begins looking desperate. And all of it happens without you saying a word. This is why detachment terrifies manipulative personalities. It removes the camouflage. Without your reactions, their tactics become visible, and visibility destroys manipulation. But this reveals a darker truth about human dynamics. Strategic silence has always been used as a weapon by powerful individuals. Kings understood it. Generals used it. Elite negotiators rely on it. Because controlled absence creates psychological pressure stronger than confrontation. And history is full of examples where silence shattered opponents far more effectively than aggression ever could. Which leads us to the next layer of the strategy, when silence stops being passive and becomes a weapon. Most men think silence is passive. They imagine it as retreat, avoidance, weakness disguised as calm. But in the hands of a disciplined mind, silence becomes something far more dangerous. It becomes pressure. Not loud pressure like shouting or confrontation, quiet pressure. The kind that forces the other person to confront their own uncertainty.
Throughout history, the most powerful figures understood this instinctively. Kings rarely argued with their enemies in public. Generals did not respond emotionally to provocations on the battlefield. Elite negotiators often sit across the table and say nothing, because silence disrupts expectation. Human communication operates on rhythm: statement, response, attack, defense, question, answer. This rhythm creates stability. But when one side suddenly refuses to participate, the entire structure collapses. Imagine someone throws an insult designed to provoke you. They expect a response. They expect anger. They expect defense. Instead, you remain calm. You look at them and move on. In that moment, something deeply uncomfortable happens inside their mind. The script they prepared no longer works. Now their brain starts searching for explanation. Did it not hear me? Did it not affect him? Did I just lose authority in front of others? Uncertainty begins spreading. And uncertainty is one of the most powerful psychological stressors a human can experience, because the mind hates unfinished interactions. We crave closure.
We crave confirmation that our actions produced an effect. Silence denies that confirmation. It leaves the other person suspended in a mental vacuum. This is why people begin escalating when ignored. They repeat themselves louder. They sharpen their tone. They increase the aggression. Not because they are confident, because they are losing control. And human beings react poorly when control disappears. This is why controlled silence has always been used strategically in positions of power. In negotiations, the person who speaks less often holds the stronger position. The one who reacts last controls the pace. The one who shows the least emotional movement controls the frame. Because emotional movement reveals vulnerability. Think of a predator watching prey. The animal that panics becomes the target. The animal that remains still forces the predator to hesitate. The same principle applies to social dynamics. The moment you detach emotionally, you remove the signals predators rely on. Now they cannot read you. And when someone cannot read you, they cannot control you. But silence does something even more powerful. It exposes insecurity. The person who provoked you expected dominance. They expected to see your emotional reaction as proof that they mattered. When nothing comes back, they are left facing a terrifying possibility. Maybe I don't have power over him at all. That thought destabilizes ego faster than any argument. And the destabilization spreads. They begin talking more, explaining themselves, trying to regain authority. Ironically, they become the reactive one. The psychological pressure flips direction. You remain calm. They begin spiraling. This is why strategic detachment often causes manipulators to reveal their worst behaviors. They become obsessive. They push harder. They attempt increasingly aggressive tactics because they're fighting to restore a dynamic that no longer exists. Your reaction. But here is where most men misunderstand the strategy. Silence alone is not power. Controlled silence is power. If you withdraw randomly, people interpret it as confusion. If you detach emotionally but continue chasing interaction, the message collapses. True strategic detachment follows a simple principle. Presence is earned. Access to your attention is not automatic. The moment someone attempts to manipulate your emotions, their access begins disappearing. Less reaction, less engagement, less availability. Not with drama, not with speeches, just gradual absence. Over time, this does something profound. People begin adjusting their behavior around you because they understand something instinctively. Provoking you no longer works. And when provocation stops working, manipulators either disappear or self-destruct. But this level of detachment requires something many men are not prepared to face. Because the moment you stop reacting to manipulation, you must also stop seeking validation from the same people, which means the version of you that needed approval must disappear completely. And most men are not ready for that transformation because it requires killing an identity they have carried their entire lives. Detachment is not a personality trait. It is discipline. Most men misunderstand this completely. They think emotional control is something you either have or you don't. But detachment is not natural. It must be trained the same way a soldier trains his reflexes. Because your instincts will betray you. When someone disrespects you, your nervous system wants to react. When someone challenges you publicly, your ego wants to defend itself. When someone misrepresents you, your mind wants to correct the narrative. These impulses feel justified, but power does not operate on emotional justification. Power operates on control of energy. Every reaction costs energy, attention, time, emotional stability.
The more you spend reacting to others, the less control you maintain over your own direction. Manipulators understand this. That's why they provoke. They are not just trying to irritate you, they are trying to pull you into their battlefield, a battlefield where the rules are emotional and chaotic. Once you enter that space, they gain advantage. Strategic detachment refuses that battlefield entirely. It does something far more disruptive. It removes the fight. This does not mean you accept disrespect. It means you stop validating it with emotional investment. There are 3 behaviors that define disciplined detachment. The first is reaction delay. Weak men react instantly. They answer immediately. They argue the moment tension appears. But reaction speed reveals emotional control. The moment someone provokes you, pause. Not visibly, not theatrically, just internally.
Observe the attempt. Ask one question silently. Does this deserve my energy? Most of the time, the answer is no. And when the answer is no, your response becomes minimal, neutral, controlled. Sometimes the most powerful response is a brief acknowledgement and nothing more. Other times, the response is complete silence. The key principle is simple. Your reaction is no longer automatic. You decide when it exists. The second behavior is selective engagement. Not every conversation deserves your participation. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Powerful individuals operate like gatekeepers. They control what enters their mental environment. If someone consistently provokes chaos, their access becomes limited. Conversations become shorter. Availability becomes rarer. Interaction becomes minimal. You do not announce this change. You simply enforce it. Over time, the message becomes clear. Your attention is conditional. People who bring conflict receive less of it. People who bring value receive more. The third behavior is emotional neutrality. This is where most men fail. They believe detachment means hiding anger, but suppressed anger still leaks through tone, body language, and subtle hostility. True detachment is colder than that. It is calm. The provocateur wants emotional fire. If they see anger, they know they still have influence. But when your demeanor remains steady, voice stable, posture relaxed, expression neutral, the psychological effect is devastating because they cannot find the button anymore. The machine they relied on stops responding. And when manipulators lose control over your reactions, they face an uncomfortable choice: adapt their behavior or disappear. Many will disappear. Some will attempt one final escalation. But the key shift has already happened. You are no longer reacting automatically. You are choosing. And choice is the foundation of power. However, this discipline creates a final challenge most men are not prepared for, because detachment changes your identity. The man who used to react to prove himself begins to vanish. The man who needed approval begins to fade, and something colder begins replacing him. A version of you that no longer seeks validation, a version that does not rush to defend itself, a version that understands something brutal about human nature. Respect is rarely given to the man who reacts. It is given to the man who cannot be moved. But becoming that man requires a psychological death, the death of the identity that spent years chasing approval. And that death is where the real transformation begins. The final barrier to true detachment is not other people. It is you. More specifically, the version of you that still needs to be seen as good, reasonable, respectable, fair. The version that still believes if you explain yourself clearly enough, people will understand. That version must die. Because the man who needs approval can always be controlled. He can be provoked with accusations. He can be manipulated with guilt. He can be trapped with social pressure. All it takes is the threat of looking bad, and suddenly he starts reacting again, defending, explaining, correcting the narrative. He believes he's protecting his reputation, but in reality, he's surrendering control. The world is full of people who know exactly how to exploit this instinct. They accuse you unfairly because they know you will rush to defend yourself. They provoke you publicly because they know you will feel forced to respond. They do not care about truth. They care about triggering the approval reflex. And once that reflex activates, the control loop begins again. The only way out is brutal. You must become comfortable being misunderstood, comfortable being judged, comfortable letting false narratives exist without chasing them. This does not mean accepting lies as truth. It means recognizing that every accusation is a trap, because every explanation invites another attack. Every defense invites another challenge. You cannot win a war where the battlefield is someone else's opinion. The man who no longer seeks approval understands a different rule. Reputation is not defended through argument. It is built through consistent behavior over time. People who matter will observe. People who are determined to misunderstand will never be convinced anyway. So the need to react disappears. And when that need disappears, something powerful happens. You become psychologically unreachable. Insults bounce off. Provocations fail. Attempts to trigger guilt stop working, because they all rely on the same hidden mechanism, your desire to be validated. Once that desire weakens, manipulation loses its entry point. But this transformation comes with a cost most men underestimate. When you stop chasing approval, many people become uncomfortable around you. Friends who relied on emotional drama will feel distance. Manipulators will call you cold. Attention seekers will accuse you of arrogance. Why? Because the old version of you was easier to control. The old version reacted. The old version explained himself. The old version played the social game of endless emotional exchange. The new version does not. He observes more than he speaks. He listens more than he reacts. He gives attention selectively. And because of this, people begin treating him differently. Some will respect him more. Others will quietly resent him. That is the price of sovereignty. Because true detachment creates separation. The emotional chaos that once surrounded you begins fading away, but so do many of the people who depended on that chaos. What remains is smaller,
quieter, but far more stable. And inside that stability, something emerges that most men never experience: control. Not control over others, control over yourself, your attention, your reactions, your emotional energy. No one pulls the strings anymore because the puppet learned how to cut them. And once the strings are gone, the performance ends. Once you master detachment, something strange begins happening around you. People start revealing themselves, not because you interrogate them, not because you confront them, but because silence removes the masks they were wearing. Most social behavior is performance. People act a certain way because they expect reactions, approval, laughter, arguments, emotional feedback. When that feedback disappears, the performance becomes unstable, and unstable people eventually expose their real nature. The provocateur becomes louder, the manipulator becomes more obvious, the attention addict becomes desperate. You don't need to expose them, they expose themselves. This is the hidden advantage of detachment. You stop wasting energy trying to figure people out. Their behavior does the work for you. Because when someone cannot control your reactions, they eventually reveal what they were trying to achieve in the first place: power, attention, validation. Once you see this pattern, a quiet selection process begins. Not everyone deserves access to your attention anymore. Some people are simply noise. They create conflict, drama, emotional turbulence, and expect you to participate. In the past, you might have reacted, argued, explained yourself, but now the calculation is different. You observe, and then you reduce access. Less time, less conversation, less emotional investment. Eventually, no presence at all. This is the part most men misunderstand. Detachment is not about controlling others. It is about controlling proximity. Who gets close to your time? Who gets close to your mind? Who gets close to your emotional energy? Most men live the opposite way. They allow anyone to provoke them, anyone to challenge their attention, anyone to pull them into unnecessary battles. Their mental space becomes crowded with noise, arguments that lead nowhere, conflicts that solve nothing, people who exist only to drain energy. But the man who understands detachment begins operating under a different rule. Access is earned, respect is required, peace is protected. This creates a quiet hierarchy in your life. Those who respect boundaries remain. Those who rely on manipulation disappear. And the space that remains becomes calmer, more focused, more controlled. But there is a final truth you must accept if you choose this path. Detachment changes how people perceive you. Some will respect the calm authority you carry. Others will interpret your silence as arrogance. Some will admire your composure. Others will resent the fact that they cannot provoke you anymore. This is inevitable, because emotional control threatens people who rely on emotional chaos. When they cannot move you, they feel powerless, and powerless people often respond with hostility. This is the final test. Not reacting even then, not explaining your mindset, not trying to convince others that your detachment is justified. Because the moment you start explaining again, you step back into the same loop you escaped. The powerful do not constantly defend their psychological framework. They simply live it, calm, controlled, unreachable. And over time, something subtle happens. People begin treating you differently. They measure their words more carefully. They test you less. They respect the boundaries you never had to announce, because they learned something through repeated failure. You cannot be moved. And once that reputation forms, the entire social dynamic changes. Conflicts shrink. Manipulators avoid you. Attention seekers look elsewhere. Not because you fought them, but because your silence made their tactics useless. This is the final transfer of power. The moment when the man who used to react to everything becomes the man who reacts to almost nothing. And in a world addicted to emotional chaos, that kind of control is rare. Rare things are respected, and respected men are left alone, which is exactly where real power begins.